Over the next 12 years, he became obsessed with recreating the world he'd shared with his mother. It would lead him to a series of dark and disturbing crimes that would eventually culminate in murder.
November 16th, 1957 was the first day of deer hunting season that year. Ed drove into town to the Warden hardware store. The Warden hardware store was owned by a woman named Bernice Warden. Ed came in, asked to buy half a gallon of antifreeze, which Bernice Warden poured out for him and wrote out a receipt. He went back out to his truck, then came back inside and asked her to see a rifle that was in the window. When Bernice Warden turned her back to him, he shot her in the back of the head and then loaded her corpse in his truck and drove back to his farm.
Gein had murdered the 58-year-old woman in broad daylight. On a dark winter's night, officers from the Plainfield Police Department began to search the Gein farm for Bernice Warden.
They couldn't get into the house, so they went around back and entered into what was called the summer kitchen, which was a little shed outside.
This property didn't have any electricity, so they were pretty much fumbling around in the dark with flashlights, but I don't think they expected to find what they did find there.
One of them turned on his flashlight and beamed it around and saw this object that was hanging from the rafters, which at first they thought was some kind of gutted deer. Although it didn't look like a deer, they realized to their incredible horror that it was a woman's corpse that was hanging by its heels and been completely gutted.
She'd been strung up, essentially, and she was slit from her sternum to her pelvis.
And they realized they had found the body of Bernice Warden. And of course, both of them just stumbled out in horror and vomited, at the sight of this thing. Amid all that wreckage, they discovered these incomprehensible, unspeakably awful objects that had been fashioned out of human body parts.
They found the remains of 12 human heads, gloves made out of the skin from a corpse's fingers.
There was a box full of female genitalia, some of which had been painted and tied with ribbons. There was a belt fashioned out of female nipples, faces of women that had been flayed from the skulls and that had been preserved.
Officers would soon discover, inside a paper bag in Gein's home, the severed head of a woman who'd been missing from Plainfield for over 2 years.
He freely confessed to the murders of Bernice Warden and Mary Hogan. It was only during his interrogation that he revealed that they were taken from the corpses he had dug up from the local cemetery.
In November 1957, Ed Gein was charged with the murder of Bernice Warden. The media descended on the tiny town of Plainfield, Wisconsin. On November the 21st, 1957, the 51-year-old pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity at his arraignment at Waushara County Court, and it was declared that he was unfit to stand trial.
He was tried and found guilty of the murder of Bernice Warden, but then he was judged insane and stuck back in the mental institution.
Over 60 years since the horrific crimes, Gein has grown into a notorious figure in American folklore, a killer of almost mythic proportions.
With Psycho establishes, and, Ed Gein establishes, this quintessentially American figure of horror. The ordinary middle American guy who turns out to be this monster in disguise.
The man with an unhealthy obsession with his mother brazenly murdered 2 women and kept a bizarre collection of gruesome keepsakes inside his house of horrors.